Welcome, Kristina.
Thank you.
Kristina is a senior researcher at RISE, and she has a background in human computer interaction, and of course she is interested in this bridge of how technology will affect individual lives.
Yes.
So I will give the floor.
Thank you. Can everyone hear well? Good. So I started thinking about ethics back when I was doing decision support and teaching people about data visualization, how to analyze data visually and present it. And it was obvious that we would have problems because engineers don't talk a lot about ethics. So what is ethics, right? I'll also ask you forgiveness if I'm basic at times. I don't know at what level you are, right? So please interrupt me, just ask me questions or say, this is obvious, right? So ethics can be held as a set of principles based on what individuals or society thinks are right and wrong, right? Sometimes it's used interchangeably with morals, sometimes it's not, right? And it's a voluntary guided behavior, unlike laws. In a way, laws are often calcified ethics in the sense that when your society has decided that something is ethical and or right or morally right, and they want it to create a system that promotes or enforces it, they will create laws. So it often shapes laws and regulations, right? But ethics is more than that. Often ethics is the first thing we do, right? Long before we have the laws, right? We start thinking about, is this good? Is this going to lead to good things? Is this bad in any way? And that's where we form that. And the ethics discussion we have right now about technologies like AI hopefully will inform the regulations we will have tomorrow. They are not. Ethics is often treated, especially by Western societies, as something that we know how they look like. Very often when I sit with groups, they will say that, we'll do this, this is ethical. And I ask them, so for example, take the example, I want to export an app to Saudi Arabia, and they want to put, remove images of women or possibly put hijabs on them, right? Is this the right or not? Well, most Western developers will say, no, they can't do that, right? But if they export something to us, they also think they should conform to other ethics. So usually when you're in a country, you expect people to conform to your ethics in both directions. This is, I think, a lovely little experiment. We talked about it yesterday, actually, but I've had this slide for a long time about the MIT moral machine. They were talking about, who should a car kill when it gets a choice? And this is a stupid decision, right? Because a car doesn't say, I'm going to kill someone. It just tries not to kill anyone until it's close enough that something bad happens. But what they found out was that they got these clusters of, respondents. They had 130 countries that had at least 100 respondents each. And they got these clusters of, different opinions on who you would save, which is really interesting, right? So you had like the Western, the Eastern, and the Southern cluster. They did not have, the same opinions. And the countries are not obviously in groups that you would imagine. For example, Nicaragua and Lithuania are very close. Right. So So it's interesting in the sense that we often treat ethics as something that is like, we just find the right ethical principle and everything will be good, right? But I said societies and individuals, it differs from societies, it differs between individuals. So it's a lot, we really need to talk about it. That's maybe the most important part. Then we also have like professional ethics, professional disciplines in the ethics, right? So medicine has had an ethics discussion for very long. We know about the Hippocratic Oath, right? And then comes medical ethics, bioethics, patient autonomy, very often in response to violations. The Nuremberg Code, for example. Very often people do something really bad and then you backtrack and you realize that we have to enforce that people don't do this again. I spent a while in journalism because I do a lot about communicating data and information. Early newspapers had a very limited ethics. You could write anything about anyone, right? Scandal rags, in a sense, right? But around the 1920s, they started to get an opinion about, what is ethics in our profession. So there's this process from a personal responsibility to a broad concern in ethics in all fields, in a sense, right? It starts with people saying this is how you should treat. Maybe you have you're taught by someone who tells you that you should do this and not that. But then it becomes a broad concern. It becomes, for example, a professional code. It can become laws and regulations. Very often these are not entirely perfect, right? I usually say that if you want medical AI, right, you want doctors, AI doctors, right? The biggest problem is not going to be to train them. It's going to be the fact that doctors do things that ethical decisions that we can't stomach as a society. So when you put this into a machine, you have to bring these into the light and say, okay, so it's, for example, common practice that if people are going in an old age home are going to die before or after Christmas, it's better they die before. You can give them a little less food because there's going to be fewer people at Christmas and that's going to be unnecessarily painful. But you don't tell the relatives that. So things like that, right? If you put that in a machine, suddenly we have to lift it up and say, this is how we do it, right? Instead of doctors having an ethical training and doing the personal decisions. So that's going to be a huge problem, right? And that's why these practices and rules, right? They don't always cover everything. And they also have to cover the fact that not everyone can be a perfect star in ethics. Take journalists, for example. The junior journalist is not necessarily super good at ethics. The journalist education, on the other hand, has this red thread of ethics in everything they do, but still, you're young. But they do know what words, what concepts, when they have to ask someone else in the organization. Publishing a name. Okay, every junior journalist knows that if you're going to publish a name, this is an ethical decision. And if you don't feel comfortable, you go to your editor. You know who to talk to, right? So having these organizational structures that that help people with ethics, because most people want to be ethical, actually. I mean, it's often a failure of understanding the technology or understanding the problem. Engineering has had ethics, but they have mainly been built on safety and reliability, right? In a sense, right? You should build roads that work. You should build bridges that don't collapse. Often it's response to disasters in the same way that we have, the response in the medical profession. But software engineering here is still a work in progress. Because it's tricky, right? You have to understand what the machine does in order to be ethical about it. One of the biggest engineering failures when it comes to killing people is the Therac 25 irradiation machine software failure in 1985. It had, I think it was an overflow error that would simply, if I don't know what so it went from like very low to values to extremely high values. And it took quite a while to figure that out. And before that, people had been irradiated with very high values of radiation. I think it had a body count. So you have all these ongoing discussions in engineering right now. It's about privacy and bias. Privacy, of course, bias in data, transparency. Code is very rarely transparent. Who is accountable, right? If I create code and then I have a company that has someone responsible and I give the code to you and you run it and someone uses it, where in this line is someone responsible? Who is responsible for the data in a car? The people who make the car, the people who sell the car, the people who lease the car, the people who drive the car, the people who sit in the car, the people who are outside the car. All of these are influenced by what we do and that data, and they're caught in that data in different. One thing, then they have intellectual property. This is, of course, we ignored intellectual property when the internet came, right? We just tried to steamroll over the fact that suddenly everything was copyable. And now with AI, this is a bigger problem. I assume you're an AI, right? So you know the problem with data and copyright right now. Dark patterns is it's when you create technology that makes human act against their own needs and wishes, right? It's the endless scroll, the likes, the algorithms that serve you things to keep your eyes on the screen because it's ad financed. Those are dark patterns. It makes you buy extras when you're buying a Ryanair flight. One thing I think is super interesting is the Lessig, Lawrence Lessig, very early, I think this is 1990s, said code is law. That when you make code, it's like making laws, right? They enforce how we can act in the digital reality, which is becoming more and more our reality. It's actually even worse than that, because laws, at least, you can ignore, right? I can jaywalk over the road, but code can very rarely be ignored. This field says that you have to input the data in percentage, and it has to be tens of percentages. You can't say 25% because it's not allowed. So the person who takes the information from the government and makes the website decides a lot about how we interact with government, but we don't talk about it. And now we have AI, and it, of course, as everyone understands, it's deeply intransparent, it's complicated, and it has a lot of these things like intellectual property. It has dark patterns that we hardly know about because sometimes we didn't design them, they were in the data. Certainly code is law, lack of transparency, bias, privacy problems. It has everything of these in a very misunderstood technology. So to start with, I don't know where you are on AI. Maybe you're all experts. Maybe you're all experts more than me. Narrow intelligence. How many here have heard this concept? Is there, yeah, everyone. Is there anyone who haven't? So everyone knows this, right? So, and generative AI, you know what that is, right? No one is complaining. We'll just run by that one. Have you thought about the fact that generative AI is not a corporate technology? That it's individuals who use it. When I started lecturing in the early 2023, around the summer in 2023, I started asking audiences, do you use generative AI? Do you use generative AI? Raise your hands. Okay. Do you use it for job tasks? Is it a personal or a company AI? Personal, yes. Do you talk to your colleagues or your management about doing this? Yes.
Yes, management, no.
Oh, so. Do you write that you've written something partly by AI when you send it on?
Yes.
Much better than it used to be. So usually, and this has changed, right? But at the very start of this, when I asked people, right, it would be like, okay, so people have used it. 80% of the people who used it said they used it for work tasks. And like maybe 1% would have talked to their colleagues about it. So we are getting better about talking about it, which is, I think, understanding technology and talking about technology is fundamental for building ethics. I like practical ethics, and so because I think that the medical profession has it right. This is, by the way, this is November 2023. 55% have used unapproved AI, large language models and generative AI, and 40% of the people who use generative AI have used explicitly banned solutions at work. Right. So we are already involved in how it's used, right? We're white-collar workers. We spend a lot of time figuring out our own use cases, but we have very little impact on how it's developed. And this is, of course, an extreme ethical conundrum, right? Because even though you can figure out how to use it ethically, you're not always given the information to understand what ethical use of AI means when it comes to generative AI. When it comes to other types of AI, it's usually, yeah.
So I'm wondering, is it really that we have very little influence, like compared to any other technology? Because obviously companies develop things that people use.
Yes.
We have exactly the same control over AI by using or not using certain things as we have over, I don't know, Hollywood movies or cars on our roads or something. Is there a difference?
I think there's in a sense a difference. Part of the difference is the fact that to understand the black box like AI, you have to either test it, which means you have to have the ability to test it, or you have to have information from someone the data is trained on. And in many cases, you don't get that. While in I do agree, and it's not perfectly deterministic, or it's deterministic but so complex that it doesn't matter, which means that your ability to understand, if A, so B, is difficult. Also, I mean, some AI solutions, for example, generative AI, are deeply unethical in their own right. Do you know who created it? Usually most AI technology, most technologies can be unethical, right? Your computer is probably built with practices that you don't really want to think about. But I do think that the part of the complexity is even understanding what it does. That people should can you use this AI in this situation, for example? Are there tests for that? And I do think that it's not an entirely different problem, but it's more complex. It's more difficult, especially for the big foundation models, more difficult to figure out, is this, where will it jump, right? What is the difference between this and that? What was it trained on? What are the risks in that capacity? Can it figure out how to do things based on, is it trained specifically material that's problematic, or can it figure out problematic sequences by synthesizing information? Typical child sexual abuse information is a typical problem of that caliber. So I don't know. Is it different? I think it's partly that some AI solutions are opaque by that we don't really know. I mean, even the people who design them are speculating right now, especially if it comes to the large language models, which is so. I have been a bit specialized on that, so I'll return the large language models, but I think about it over the entire field. And some of the problem is that there's an unwillingness to talk about things like the sustainability questions, right? For example, they could give us more information about energy use, but they
Sure, but again, is it any different from any other technology? Right? That's my question, because every new technology that comes, general public doesn't understand it. In many cases, the creators don't fully understand it. If you look at the car, nobody could predict the death toll and the environmental impact of the automotive
This
industry,
is true.
Right?
Yeah, I think it's more difficult to measure. And
it's unique for us because this is the first really big thing that's happening. Although if you connect it, compare it to even internet, I think there are some parallels.
Yes, right? I think there's certainly a huge amount of parallels with the internet. Also, the fact that it's individual first, right? It's individuals trying to figure out how to do things, right? As a difference from the internet, at least it was fairly basic in design. The platforms and the algorithms came later. But yes, I do agree. I mean, there's this. Is it possible to understand versus, if it's possible for me as an individual to understand? So I don't think it's fundamentally different, but I think that AI is making it more difficult, really. For example, like you could go through code, so code is law for an application, but going through understanding how an AI model works, right, and what it will do can mostly be done just as we understand humans, right? You input, output, try to test, try to benchmark. So yes, in a sense, if you have access to the code, someone has access to the code. They can say, no, we don't do this. But for an AI model, it's much more difficult. Even if you want to do it as a company, you can't. We'll skip. So one thing I find interesting is Hollingridge's dilemma in a sense, right? It says that it's very difficult to, and here we are, right, to predict the effects until the technology has been widely developed and used, and controlling change is difficult when it's widely used and has become entrenched in society. And here's where we are, right? We will start figuring out the effects of different types of AI solutions and algorithms after they're already entrenched. So when it comes to the AI debate, it's largely been around this. This is, of course, 2023, but after Geoffrey Hinton was here, it popped up again, right? AI will be extremely dangerous. It can destroy humanity and so on and so forth, right? Rapid self-improvement. And this is, of course, based on the singularity, the intelligence explosion model, which I assume you have heard about, right? Right. I usually say that is always 40 years away, right? 30 or 40 years away, right? Good. It ends up in 2000, Binge in 2030, you know, Kurzweil 2045. It's always 30 or 40 years away. I think Hinton says like 20. So maybe it's closing up, right? I think that fusion is 30 years away. So when we have fusion, maybe we should think about the singularity. No, but really, this represents uncertainty. It's a theoretical model, and we are, of course, deeply uncertain on when it's going to happen. What I think is interesting is that this was this open letter that we should pause AI, including Elon Musk. I find that deeply ironic. And I love this answer. So this is Gebru and Bender and Macmillan Major and Mitchell. I think that Mitchell was doing it under a pseudonym because she was still working for Microsoft at the time. They made a rebuttal, and they said that this letter addresses none of the ongoing harms from these systems. And now they're talking about generative AI and large language models specifically. And they did this letter very early, just like the stochastic parrots paper still is good, 2021, and people haven't really reached that point in the public debate. Work exploitation, massive data theft is of course a discussion whether this is theft or not, right? That create products that profit a handful of entities, although of course the handful of entities was supposed to be OpenAI, but it turns out to be NVIDIA. The explosion of synthetic media in the world, right, that reproduces systems of oppression that's bias and endangers our information ecosystem, which is like AI slop. Concentration of power in the hands of a few people that excavate social inequities. So they said it all almost, right? I think that maybe the biggest crisis in large language model ethics at the moment is the fact that people have been saying that and no one has been listening. So there's many different ways, on the other hand, to slice the pie of, you know, where should we care about where AI is ethical. One of them, of course, is whether the solutions themselves can be ethical. This is Asimov. You have like a brain, and then you have unbreakable ethical rules, like you shall not kill. It assumes that the AI knows if, you know, what does it mean to kill someone. It assumes a lot, actually. It assumes that you can build it. It says that in its positron brain, it has these encoded in every single part, right? So they can never break them. Large language models look much like humans, right? You have like this brain that you have aligned, much like you try to teach kids. And then you have guardrails around it trying to ensure that it doesn't do things that you don't want it to do. But it has no purpose. It has no real agency. It feels no pain. It has no reason to be empathic. It does empathy very well. I mean, it does our empathy very well, in a sense, right? Here is like, they're really, really good at talking about how humans should treat other humans, because it's really, really good at doing patterns that we are agreed on. And we are generally, as humans, agreed on how to treat other humans. And this is reflected in our what we write. And of course, then it's reflected in an AI that has been trained on what we write. So it does that very, very well, actually. This is 2023. Doctors use a chatbot to improve their bedside manner. People ask them, do you use large language model for diagnosis? And they said, no, we would never, right? But then they said, yeah, but we found out that it makes these wonderful scripts about how to treat people, you know, how to talk to people who have a disease that will kill them. Wonderful scripts, including, you know, like how to sit them down, how to fix a room, how to talk to their relatives, everything like that. And doctors hate to do that. So it's also a matter, we are still working on, you know, where the place are in how we construct a better reality. So this is in a sense, right, they carry our ethics with them. or at least the ethics we're talking about, if we train them on that data. But this we were into before. Of course, the black boxes, they lack explainability, such as humans, right? You can't go into the code and say, why did you do this? Very many people try to, when you have a conversational interface like large language models, you can ask them, if, how did you do this? And they will answer with something that is not true, but sounds very convincing. They will tell you that they did it, that they calculated by the book, but they did not, as far as we can see from the tests that have been done. There's no transparency and oversight how they're trained. There's little knowledge about data that it's trained on, and how it was aligned and fine-tuned. We often talk about how Chinese large language models are censored, right? We rarely talk about how American large language models are censored, because alignment is also censorship in a sense. Right? It is censorship. It might be that we agree with the purpose for which is censored. We think it's ethical. It should not do this. It should not do that, right? It shouldn't convince people to kill themselves. But it's still a type of censorship. We take a machine that can answer lots of different questions. Yes.
Just let me know when I'm asking too many questions. But again, because there is a lot of discussion how AI is very different from everything else, right?
Yeah.
But all of the things here, they are really not that different from when I'm buying a new car. I'm assuming that the company was hiring qualified engineers, that they have done all the right tests on it and so on. But I don't actually know.
No,
it's
but
kind of the same, except, again,
two differences,
some industries are older and there have been those things developed, and this is a new thing. But
yes,
every new thing went through this phase.
Yes, but if you ask the car company, or the company that irradiated lots of people, right, they can find the software bug. If you ask an AI company,
I mean, some of those things, like if you ask them, did you train on illegal data? They will probably say no, but they could figure out if they did or not. Some of the things, yes. Some of the things are kind of one level of complexity higher, but there is a lot of things that we really cannot.
But the complexity higher still matters, right?
Yes.
It's like peer review was dead long before we got generative AI, right? Information society was already here. We already had our information ecosystems full of too much information. We have attention scarcity, but it's worse now. And that still matters, right?
I was just going to say that even though if we can see that this would happen when you buy a car as well, we can see in society that we are treating AI as special in these ways.
Yes.
Which is then effectively making it special.
That is also true, actually.
Really, isn't it because it's new?
Partly. But even though if it could change in 5 years, this is still where we are now, that it's special. Even though I agree that it shouldn't be treated as special, it is being treated as special by everyone else. So we have to also accept that.
It is doing things that we used to do. So we have like bias, and we have, and I'll skip these because I think you know about them, and the fact that it tends to reinforce its prejudice, right? Because if you train it, it'll give you the most probable response all the time, which means that it ends up with only male white CEOs, for example, with the same time of tables and so on. But I think what the diversity thing is maybe the most problematic in a sense, right? Which this should be diverse, being cut off. People are very diverse, and that is also resilience and an ethical thing, because people are reflective. They do reflect and think, oh, maybe this is not a good idea to do this, right? And most of the AI solutions that we put in place of people don't do that reflection. They don't learn continually. They are not diverse. So if you have like one AI doctor, which is the same AI doctor, right? If that AI doctor has a bias against you, there's nothing you can do, right? You can't go to another doctor because that's the doctor. While humans, right? You employ Lisa and Steve and Jonathan and Evie because they're different people, and that's like different approaches, they have different ethics, so they can kind of agree, they can see new things, right? And then if you have a non-reflective AI in that position instead, of course, that's a problem, right? Both for the fact that it will have the same bias. The humans may be more biased, but at least like it is variety. And because it's not reflective, right? That's one thing that it doesn't do. AIs don't question. And maybe we're not reflective either, but we just have more information. What we do is, of course, a question, right? So when I talk about, what you can do with AI, I usually say, like it looks like it has much more ideas than you have. But if you add all your colleagues that have different ideas, they win over the AI, right? Then you have like the unintended societal impacts. I think that we are flooding systems with synthetic and semi-synthetic data, and we also put to use to make decisions for us. And that makes it a technology that we need to think about the ethics in a way that we didn't forecast, because we kept the ethical decisions were kept on the human side of cars, right? I decide how to drive. The car does not decide how to drive. So that's a difference as well, right? It comes closer to us in how they affect the decision making that we're doing as a society. And yeah, this is just about the overflowing information. So we'll skip that one. One thing I said also that AI in some cases, special large language models are deeply unethical, and diffusion models for images are deeply unethical technologies by themselves, right? This is the Times article from 2023. OpenAI used Kenyan workers on less than $2 per hour to make ChatGPT less toxic. And I don't know how many of you have read about what it means to be a worker that makes something less toxic, but I will tell you that watching those things are things that you should get more than $2 an hour to do. Preferably enough so you can hire a good psychologist afterwards. They tag in evaluate and review materials, right? But you also have the fact that image generation AI, for example, can mimic specific artists, so can large language models. An AI that was put to use, driving cars, whatever, they're trained on human patterns of work to replace the workers it's been trained on. And then we really should discuss, who should benefit from this. And maybe, we don't know yet, right? We don't know who owns the copyright to AI produced content. We think that it's not possible because according to current rules, the AI isn't a human, so it can't have a copyright, right? Who's responsible? Are you allowed to train on data that you don't have the right to use? Humans do, right? It's not really stealing. It just isn't something we don't know about yet. Is it unethical? Well, I think most people agree that it's unethical, right? Who's responsible for copyright infringement? I think all these end up with like who pays for it and who gains by it, especially because this is the internet that is much of what it trains on is something that we put out there for the common good. And then the question is, in a sense, right, is a collaborative exercise. You don't agree?
I partially agree. And I mean, it's really interesting because I remember when a lot of those discussions, especially about copyright, were at the beginning of the internet, right? And essentially, copyright was designed for a very different world.
Yes.
We went through one time when we had absolutely no idea how to handle it. Now we are seeing the same, essentially the same, right? I see so many parallels.
Yeah.
We still have a law which is completely unprepared for what's happening there.
But
I understand the difference between ethics and law, and that's essentially the question, right? But ultimately, a lot of the defense of copyright was about comparing it to stealing, which if I print a book and somebody steals it from me, then I don't have it. But if somebody copies it, I still have it. So to what degree is it stealing and to what degree
I agree.
So ultimately, it is about who pays for it. Right?
Yes, that's in a sense, and what society we want to build.
Yes, exactly.
That, I think, is the most basic thing. And I like this quote. I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so I can do art and writing, not for AI to do my art and writing so I can do laundry and dishes, right? That in a sense, maybe the main question we should talk about when it comes to ethics is how we treat other humans, how they treat us, how we build societies that work, right? And I think that the mistake we did with the internet was that we let the companies decide. We let social media decide what democratic dialogue was. We pushed it onto Facebook to do their own censorship in the name of democracy instead of talking about it. And now we do much the same with artificial intelligence. We have to have that discussion. We have to have, maybe it's impossible to keep in, medical information for insurance companies because we need that medical information. We need to analyze it to make people healthier. Maybe we should just kill off the insurance companies then. I mean, I think that that's the main point here, right? That maybe society needs to step up and figure out where we make it safe. Take cars, right? We could talk about cars. We ask people who make cars to make them safer. They have to have seat belts. They do the end caps. They should be safer, and it should just crumble when you drive into something, and they should crumble just enough so you don't die, right? But then we also have driver's licenses. We also have education. We have roads we build so people will be be fairly safe. We have insurances we enforce. We have hospitals that can take care of people who get hurt in accidents. Cars still kill people. We decided that we want that technology, even though it kills people. Cars still pollute. We decided we want that technology, even though it still pollutes. But we have all these mitigations throughout society. And that, I think, is what we need for technology too. It's not a playing field where we can just be, say to providers, you do everything, figure this out, right?
And we have regulations as well.
Yeah.
And we have regulations as well.
Yes.
If someone does it intentionally.
Yes. On this picture, actually, because I think that many people out there assume that technology does the heavy lifting for us, right? This is Amazon warehouse workers. The computer tells them what to do, and they do the heavy lifting, right? It's not necessarily so that the machines will end up where we want them to be. One of the worst things I read in 2023 was a girl who said that I loved my work because I like to draw, and I drew characters and I rigged them for computer games. But now Midjourney draws the characters and I only rig them. I'm much more productive, but everything I loved with what I did is gone. So, and then there's reliability, of course, right? I think that maybe one of the things, I believe in practical ethics, one of the main things here is the insight into how the technology works. And that includes how it doesn't work. And we talked a little about that. We talk a lot about how technology works. It does this. We talk very little about what it doesn't do. What can't it do? Where does it fail? And that's, I think, is the ethical part, right? It's not, it does very well over there. It's saying that figuring out where it's going to not work, right? That we do organizations and societies, right, structured to catch the problems, right? And that we experiment a lot right now, because now we have this situation where we talked about in Colin Ridges, right? It's becoming entrenched, but we still can shape it. And this is when we have to have the discussion. Very many ethical solutions, including the guidelines, the age-lag guidelines for Europe, they tend to end up with human in the loop. This is a picture of two people sleeping in a Tesla, and this is how I envision human in the loop. When the decisions are complex enough, we are lazy as humans, right? If the AI is right 95% of the time, and you need to double check it every single time, and the better the solution, the more we have to double check, right? The more difficult it is, because the point of AI is to list off things that are difficult to double check, in a sense. Not working. I fail to see how the human in the loop concept looks like any human I've met.
I think human in the loop concept is essentially just distributing the responsibility.
Yes.
It's a way for saying, okay, not my problem, somebody else was supposed to fix it.
I'm not too fond of Ethamolik, but I think that when he called the people who gets the responsibility with AI does sin eaters, I think he was onto something, right? because somehow the buck stops somewhere, right? And the AI is probably not responsible. So someone has to be responsible. And how is that going to look like?
There is another term for this that I've heard, and that's meaningful human control.
Yeah.
And when you look at this image, it doesn't scream meaningful human control.
No, it does not. And this image, this is the Samsung S21 Ultra, and it's taking a picture of the moon. It's a lovely picture, isn't it? Surprising for a smartphone, isn't it? Right? Of course, it really looks like this. Because it uses AI to sharpen images. And for the moon, it's very easy because the moon presents the same face and so on. But the problem with this is that it's not something that we think about happening. All the micro decisions that AI will do are going to be difficult to control and be human in loop for because we are not going to see them. So how do we do meaningful human control? We don't even know that something has happened. So this isn't dangerous, but say I take a photo of a demonstration and it uses pictures from American movies to help sharpen the paces in this demonstration. Gina Davis Institute says that 17% of people in crowd scenes in American movies are women, the rest are men. What do you think the AI will do with sharpening these faces? And will it create faces that might look like someone else who looks like they've become part of that demonstration? How do we even use this as proof anymore, right? Do we even think about that this is happening? Then, of course, there's a power of symmetries. I think that we're coming close to when I should stop because I'm on 41 minutes, but will you tell me? Virginia Eubanks wrote a book called Automating Inequality, which I think is about algorithms, but I think is really good. There's a number of women who's written about this, by the way. So that one is good. Zuboff's, what is the Shoshana Zuboff book? Damn it. Attention, no? Okay. Kathy O'Neill with Weapons of Math Destruction about algorithms. Most of these things, as we talked about, are very applicable to AI. She notes that the poor and the disenfranchised are more likely to be exposed to algorithm and AI decisions. The CEO is going to be hired by a human. The factory worker is going to be hired by an artificial intelligence and probably also managed by one. And you would think that given that we should know that artificial intelligence is fallible, that people would realize this, right? But they don't. So you have all these wonderful examples. You have the Amazon recruiting tool to automate the review of job applications. It hated women, not because it was evil. And I think that that was the worst thing in the media coverage of this. They said that the algorithm, the AI was problematic, but it was really the Amazon managers, right, that were problematic. Yes.
Exactly. I mean, it's not that the AI-powered tool hated women, but Amazon already.
I know, but they didn't want to talk about that.
The AI tool hated women more. So,
yes,
so
it did, because it of course makes the signal stronger, right? And it makes for a single one. You can still find one manager that will hire women at Amazon, but the AI tool. The compass recidivist algorithms that classified risk to reoffend. Black people were almost twice as likely to be flagged. The Netherlands child benefits that had a bias against people with dual nationalities and low-income families. Because that's also a problem, right? And when you have these rules, banks who look into whether you're going to default on a loan, they know they should look at things like whether you default on loans, right? But they also know that if you're divorced, that would be a very good predictor, but they know they're not allowed to use that, right? So they don't usually write that into the algorithm when they're not supposed to. You can at least get some kind of transparency. The problem here is that you don't get transparency in the same sense. For the Amazon-powered recruiting tool, when you remove information about who are female, it still flagged words that women were likely to use. It doesn't matter. It's like, so that's a difference, yes.
Although, to be honest, because we are talking about the Amazon thing, it actually shows that it did give more transparency. Because that problem was there before and nobody could see it because it was people involved.
Humans are much more intransparent than AI solutions, of course. I'm not saying, because for one thing, it's like you can reflect and lie, which you will do if I put you in a room. And also, you don't have the time, and I don't have the time to ask every single one of you all these questions that you can ask an AI within like a day. You can do so many tests, right? If you have the computer power, you can't do this with humans. So I agree. But the diversity is a resilience factor for ethics, I'd say. Well, and in Sweden, we have this one. Have you seen this one?
Amnesty International have published some reports, not just for Swedish, for Denmark also.
Yep. Women are 3 times as likely to be flagged as potential fraudsters when it comes to taking care of children, right? Being home to take care of children. And men do like, I think it was 30% errors in the applications, women were 29%. The division, 55% women, hours, right, were 55% men and 45% men. So there's no huge difference in the things that you would imagine that are things that means that you're likely to do fraud, right? That would be how many hours, of course, if there's like 3 times as many women asking for that, and whether they do errors. This did not correlate. What happened? Well, they treated this as an information and a publicity problem.
I don't want to interrupt your talk,
yes,
but it's good to wrap up in a minute, maybe.
Then I will wrap up. So I will just say this. So where do we apply ethics, right? So we have the design and behavior of the AI systems. This will be the providers trying to figure out, you know, not only do they do ethical behavior, but how do we communicate the behavior so people can do ethical decisions about where to use them, right? How AI is deployed and used in practice, fed by this one, of course. This is also everyone who deploys it. Where can you deploy it? How do you figure out if it's doing wrong, right? How do you get a feedback loop that tells you? Societal impact and systemic risk. Systemic risk is what's flagged in the GPA Code of Practice, which is the interim regulation that should have been in place by now, or should have been decided on, but it's not. They looked at systemic risk, which is the idea that if we have enough of these AIs, right, small problems can become big problems, right? That would be like manipulation, the possibility for people to do, I don't know, subway attacks, whatever, you know. Very badly understood so far. Production ethics, like labor sustainability and data sourcing. We know this is a problem in some cases. For some AI solutions, it's not a problem. Many narrow AI solutions are made by companies who have the right to. But I should note that even then, things that capture machines also capture the humans who run the machines, right? So even then, you have to think about this. Communications, this is the clarity of capabilities and limitations, having that clarity and discussing that, especially the limitations. The right to technology, in a sense, right? That if we have very powerful tools, who gets to use them becomes a differentiator in society. Who gets to use the good solution that can write for you or do things for you, and who does not, right? Who provided the eggs and who gets to eat the omelette? Is that, and power symmetries, and in their extremes is of course military technology, which we already are seeing, and which I think is going to be horrifying. This is it.